Alexander Reeves sat in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of his Manhattan skyscraper, his steel-gray eyes scanning the acquisition documents spread before him. At 42, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion. Yet something always felt missing, like a puzzle with crucial pieces lost in the void. The doctors had explained it countless times after the accident 3 years ago. Retrograde amnesia affecting his memories from before age 30. Everything prior to building his fortune remained locked away, inaccessible. The meeting droned on as his legal team discussed the purchase of a shipping company based in Athens. Alexander's attention wandered to the rain streaking down the floor-to-ceiling windows when his assistant knocked and entered with a slight, olive-skinned woman in her 50s. "Mr. Reeves, this is Dr. Elena Papadakis, the translator you requested for the Greek contracts," his assistant announced before retreating. Elena approached with measured steps, her dark eyes holding an intensity that made Alexander pause. Something stirred within him, a sensation he couldn't name. She extended her hand, and when their fingers touched, a strange electricity seemed to pass between them. "Calamera, Mr. Reeves," she said in accented English. "I am here to help with your documents." As she settled beside him and began reviewing the papers, Alexander found himself studying her profile. There was something achingly familiar about the way she tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear, the gentle curve of her smile when she concentrated. "These contracts are quite complex," Elena murmured, then began reading a particularly dense clause aloud in rapid Greek. The melodic words washed over Alexander like a tide, and suddenly the corporate boardroom seemed to dissolve around him. His vision blurred, and fragments of images flashed through his mind. Whitewashed buildings cascading down hillsides, the scent of jasmine and sea salt, rough hands teaching him to tie fishing nets. Elena continued reading, her voice growing stronger, more passionate as she translated the maritime terminology. "Ta plyratories prepe na exasphalazoin oti ola ta skafi." The Greek syllables unlocked something deep within Alexander's consciousness. He gripped the edge of the conference table as memories crashed over him like waves against ancient cliffs. A small fishing village on a remote Greek island. Calloused hands that belonged to a man named Dmitri who had saved him from drowning. A tiny whitewashed house where he had recovered for months, learning the language, falling in love with a simple life. And Elena, not Dr. Papadakis the translator, but Elena, the schoolteacher who had tended his wounds and taught him to speak Greek during those long, healing months. Elena, who had loved him when he was just Alex, a nameless man washed up on their shores with no memory of his privileged past. "Elena," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. She stopped mid-sentence, her face paling as she turned to look at him fully for the first time. Her hands trembled as recognition dawned in her eyes. "Alexandros," she breathed, using the Greek version of his name she had given him all those years ago. The boardroom fell silent as Alexander's legal team watched in confusion, but Alexander saw only Elena, remembering everything now, how he had been sailing alone when the storm hit, how the head injury had stolen his memories of his former life, how for 8 months he had lived as a simple fisherman on Kalathea Island, believing himself to be nothing more than a man grateful to be alive. He remembered their morning walks along the rocky shore, their evenings sharing simple meals of fresh fish and local wine, the way she had patiently taught him to read Greek using children's books. Most of all, he remembered the night before he left, when his memory had suddenly returned in fragments and he realized who he truly was. Alexander Reeves, heir to a fortune, a man with responsibilities waiting in another world. He had told Elena he would return, had promised to bring her into his real life, but when he reached New York, his advisors convinced him it was better to let that chapter close. They said a Greek schoolteacher would never fit into his world, that the island romance was just a product of his injured brain seeking comfort. Gradually, the pull of his empire had consumed him, and he had buried those months deeper and deeper until they seemed like someone else's dream. Now, seeing Elena's face etched with years of waiting and disappointment, Alexander felt the weight of his betrayal crush down upon him. She had aged, lines of sorrow marking her once smooth features, but her eyes held the same gentle strength that had nursed him back to health. "You never came back," she said quietly, switching to English, though her accent was thicker now, heavy with emotion. "I remember everything," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Elena, I remember everything, and I have no excuse for staying away except my own cowardice." His lawyers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to leave or stay. Alexander stood slowly, his legs unsteady as the full weight of his recovered memories settled over him. "You were supposed to be just a translator," he said with a bitter laugh. "My assistant found you through an agency. How is it possible that you're here?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I have been working as a translator in New York for 2 years, hoping—" She paused, gathering herself. "I know you are an important man now. I see you in newspapers, on television. I never thought you would remember simple Elena from Calathea." Alexander moved around the table toward her, ignoring the stunned faces of his business associates. "Simple Elena? You saved my life. You gave me the most peaceful months I have ever known. You showed me what it meant to live without the weight of expectations, to find joy in sunrise over the harbor and the taste of bread baked fresh each morning." "But it was not real life," Elena said sadly. "When your memory returned, you went back to real world. I understood." "No," Alexander said firmly, reaching for her hands. "It was the most real life I have ever lived. Everything since has been the dream." As he held Elena's weathered hands in his, more memories surfaced. He remembered promising to bring her to New York, to show her his world, while keeping the best parts of the simple life they had shared. He remembered his plans to buy a house by the sea where they could escape when the corporate world became too much. Most painfully, he remembered the love in her eyes when she had said goodbye, trusting completely that he would return for her. "Elena, I need you to know that not a day has passed in these 3 years that I haven't felt something missing. The doctor said it was normal for amnesia patients to feel displaced, but it wasn't the medical condition. It was you. It was the life we shared, locked away where I couldn't reach it." Elena studied his face, searching for the simple fisherman she had loved beneath the expensive suit and manicured appearance of the billionaire. "Alexandros," she said softly, "you have different life now. Wife, perhaps? Children?" Quote. "No," Alexander said quickly. "No one. I could never explain it before, but I think part of me was waiting, even when I couldn't remember why." One of his lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, perhaps we should postpone this meeting?" Alexander didn't take his eyes off Elena. "Cancel it. Cancel everything for the next month." "Sir?" "I said cancel everything. The Athens deal can wait. Everything can wait." Elena's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 3 years ago," Alexander said. "I'm choosing love over duty, memories over money, Elena over everything else." He turned to his stunned legal team. "Draft whatever documents you need to put my affairs in order for an extended absence. Set up a trust to handle day-to-day operations. And book 2 tickets to Athens on the next available flight." "Alexandros, you cannot just leave," Elena protested. "Your business, your responsibilities." "Will survive without me for a while," Alexander finished. "Elena, I've spent 3 years building an empire that feels hollow without the memories of what truly matters. I need to go back to Calathea with you. I need to remember how to be the man you fell in love with, not this corporate shell I've become." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "And after? When you remember fully what it means to be simple fishermen again, will you leave once more?" Alexander felt the question pierce his heart. He had no easy answer, no guarantee that he wouldn't be pulled back into his old life. But looking at Elena, remembering the peace he had found in her arms, and the joy of waking up to nothing more demanding than mending nets and sharing stories with the old men at the harbor, he knew he had to try. "I won't lie to you," he said. "I don't know what will happen when we get there. But I know that the man who loved you on Calathea was more real than the man who built this empire while trying to forget you. Help me find him again, Elena. Help me find us again." Elena reached up and touched his cheek gently, the way she used to when he would wake from nightmares about his lost past. "Alexandros," she whispered, "I never stopped hoping you would remember. But I feared you would remember and still choose to stay away." "Never again," Alexander promised. "Whatever happens next, I will never walk away from you again without talking it through together. We'll figure out how to build a life that honors both who I was with you and who I've become since." Quote. As Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, Alexander felt a completeness he hadn't experienced since those lost months on the island. The boardroom around them seemed to fade as he pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 3 years, Alexander Reeves felt like he was truly home, The Greek contracts lay forgotten on the polished table as Elena whispered words of love in her native tongue, each syllable bringing back more precious memories of their time together. And Alexander began to understand that some acquisitions were worth more than all the wealth in the world. 3 days later, Alexander stood on the deck of the ferry approaching Calithia Island, his hands gripping the railing as the familiar outline of the village emerged from the morning mist. Elena stood beside him, her simple cotton dress a stark contrast to the designer clothes he had insisted on buying her in Athens. She had refused most of his gifts, accepting only a single silver bracelet that reminded her of one her grandmother had worn. "It looks smaller than I remembered," Alexander murmured, watching the whitewashed buildings climb the hillside like scattered pearls. "Or perhaps you have grown larger," Elena replied with a gentle smile. "In New York, you fill rooms with your presence. Here, you will need to remember how to fit into simpler spaces." As the ferry docked, Alexander felt his carefully constructed confidence begin to crack. What if the islanders resented him for abandoning Elena? What if the simple fisherman he remembered being was just a fantasy created by his injured brain? What if he could never again find contentment in a life without mergers and stock prices? A weathered man in his 70s hobbled down the dock toward them, his face breaking into a gap-toothed grin. "Alexandros," he called out in Greek, "you came back to us!" Alexander's breath caught as he recognized Dmitri, the fisherman who had pulled him from the sea all those years ago. Without thinking, he rushed forward and embraced the old man, feeling tears sting his eyes as Dmitri's familiar scent of tobacco and sea salt surrounded him. "Dmitri, my friend," Alexander said in Greek, the words flowing naturally despite years of disuse. "I am sorry it took so long." "Time moves differently for old fishermen," Dmitri replied with a knowing wink. "We measure in seasons and tides, not days. You are here now, and that is what matters." Quote, As they walked through the narrow streets toward Elena's house, neighbors emerged from their shops and homes. Some welcomed Alexander warmly, while others watched with cautious curiosity. Children who had been toddlers during his first stay now stared at this strange man in expensive clothes who spoke their language with an odd formality. Elena's house looked exactly as Alexander remembered. A tiny 2-room structure with blue shutters and a small garden where herbs grew in clay pots. But as they crossed the threshold, he felt like an intruder. Everything seemed smaller, more fragile than his memories had painted it. "You can stay in my brother's room," Elena said, her voice carefully neutral. "He moved to Athens last year." Alexander nodded, understanding the boundaries she was setting. He had hurt her deeply by leaving, and she wouldn't simply welcome him back into her bed as if nothing had changed. He would have to earn her trust again, prove that his feelings were real and lasting. That evening, they walked to the harbor where Dmitri's boat bobbed gently at its mooring. Several old men sat mending nets by lamplight, their voices mixing with the sound of waves lapping against the dock. When they saw Alexander approaching, the conversation gradually died. "So," said Yorgos, a gruff man with hands like leather, "the rich American returns to play fisherman again." Alexander felt Elena tense beside him, but he stepped forward calmly. "I returned to remember who I was before money made me forget," he said in Greek. "If you will have me, I would like to work alongside you again." Yorgos studied him for a long moment, then gestured to a pile of nets. "Sit. Show me you remember how to mend what is broken." Alexander settled onto the dock and picked up the familiar tools. His hands, now soft from years of desk work, fumbled at first with the intricate knots. The other fishermen watched in silence as he struggled with work that had once been second nature. "Your hands have forgotten," Dmitri observed kindly. "But muscle has memory. Give them time to remember what they once knew." As Alexander worked, his fingers gradually found their rhythm. Each knot tied was like a small act of meditation, connecting him to the man he had been. The conversation around him slowly resumed, the fishermen sharing gossip about catches and weather, and gradually, tentatively, including him in their discussions. When Elena rose to leave, Alexander started to follow, but she shook her head. "Stay," she said. "Listen to the sea. Remember why you loved it here." Left alone with the old men, Alexander felt the last of his corporate persona begin to dissolve. Under the star-scattered sky, With the ancient rhythms of the tide marking time, he began to understand what he had truly lost when he returned to his former life. "She waited for you," Dmitri said quietly when the others had gone home. "Every morning for the first year, she would walk to the point where the ferry comes and watch the horizon. Even when she stopped going, I knew she was still watching from her window." Alexander's hands stilled on the net. "I thought I was doing the right thing. My advisors said—" "Advisors," Dmitri spat. "What do they know of love, of promises made under the stars? Elena is a good woman, Alexandros. If you leave her again, I will throw you back to the sea myself, memory or no memory." Alexander looked into the old man's eyes and saw the fierce protectiveness of someone who had watched Elena's heartbreak day by day. "I won't leave her again," he said simply. "But I need to figure out how to be the man she deserves, not just the man I remember being." "Then you start by being honest," Dmitri advised. "With her, with yourself, with the life you want to build. No more running away when things become difficult." Over the following days, Alexander fell into the rhythm of island life. He rose before dawn to help Dmitri prepare the boat, his hands growing rough again from handling nets and ropes. His expensive clothes gave way to simple cotton shirts and worn trousers. The constant buzz of his phone, forwarding urgent messages from his corporate empire, gradually became background noise he learned to ignore. Elena maintained her careful distance, working in her small school during the day and keeping to herself in the evenings. Sometimes Alexander would catch her watching him from her window as he worked on the boat, but when their eyes met, she would quickly look away. One evening, after a particularly good day's catch, Alexander found Elena sitting on the small bench outside her house, grading papers by lamplight. He approached hesitantly, carrying 2 glasses of wine from Dmitri's private stock. "May I sit?" he asked in Greek. Elena nodded, setting aside her papers. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the village settling into evening routines. "Tell me about your life in New York," Elena said finally. "The real life, not the newspapers and television stories." Alexander considered how to answer. "Lonely," he said at last. "Successful, but lonely. I would sit in my office high above the city and feel like I was watching life happen to other people. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I couldn't understand why none of it felt meaningful. And now, being here again? It feels like coming back to life," Alexander admitted, "but I also realize how much I've changed. The man you loved was grateful just to be alive, to have a roof over his head and honest work to do. I've lived for 3 years with unlimited choices, unlimited power. I'm not sure I can simply go back to being that simple man." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps the answer is not to go back, but to go forward. To become someone new who combines the best of both men. Alexander turned to study her profile in the lamplight. "Is that what you want? Someone new?" "I want someone real," Elena said softly. "The Alexandros I loved was real, even if his memory was false. But this man beside me now is also real, with his own experiences and knowledge. I do not need you to pretend to be someone you are no longer. I need you to be honest about who you are becoming." Alexander felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "I've been afraid that you could only love the simple fisherman, that the billionaire was too complicated for the life you want." Elena turned to face him fully. "Alexandros, I am not the same woman either. These 3 years have changed me. I learned to speak English fluently. I left the island to work in New York, hoping to find you. I am no longer just a village schoolteacher who has never seen the world beyond these shores." They sat looking at each other as the weight of their mutual transformations settled between them. Neither was the person they had been during those 8 months of first love, but perhaps that didn't matter. Perhaps what mattered was whether they could find their way to loving who they had become. "Elena," Alexander said carefully, "what if we tried to build something new together, not recapturing what we had, but creating what we could have? I have resources now that could benefit the island, ways to help preserve this life while connecting it to the larger world. And you have experiences and knowledge that could help me stay grounded in what really matters." Quote. Elena reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "I would like to try," she said, "but slowly, Alexandros, with patience and honesty. No more running away when things become complicated." Alexander lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. No more running away, he promised. Whatever we build it together. As if summoned by their words, Alexander's phone buzzed insistently with another urgent message from his corporate empire. This time, instead of ignoring it, he pulled out the device and, with Elena watching, deliberately powered it off. Tomorrow I will call my office and arrange for a more permanent delegation of responsibilities, he said. It's time to stop living two separate lives and figure out how to live one authentic one. Elena smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he had seen from her since the reunion in New York. Tomorrow, she agreed. Tonight, let us just sit here and remember what it feels like to be still. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the small conference room he had built above Elena's expanded school, watching her teach a video lesson to students in New York via satellite connection. The technology was cutting edge, but the room itself was simple. Whitewashed walls, wooden furniture made by local craftsmen, windows that opened to let in the salt breeze. Elena finished her lesson about Greek mythology, switching effortlessly between English and Greek as she answered questions from children on 2 continents. When she closed the laptop, she found Alexander watching her with the same wonder he had felt that first day in the boardroom. The children in New York want to visit Calathea next summer, she said, moving into his arms. They are fascinated by our stories of island life. Then we'll arrange it, Alexander replied, kissing her forehead. The cultural exchange program was your idea. We can expand it. Through the window, they could see the harbor where Dimitri's fishing boat was returning with the day's catch. Alexander still went out with him twice a week, his hands now permanently marked by honest work. The other 3 days, he managed his streamlined business empire from the small office, having sold off the companies that didn't align with his values, and restructured the rest to focus on sustainable development and education initiatives. Are you happy? Elena asked, a question she posed regularly, still half afraid he might wake up one day missing his old life. Alexander considered the question seriously, as he always did. I'm complete, he said finally. For the first time in my life, all the pieces fit together. I'm not choosing between who I was and who I became. I'm being who I'm meant to be. Elena smiled and pulled him toward the door. Come. Dimitri is cooking the fish tonight, and he claims to have a story about a sea monster that will make us laugh until our sides hurt. As they walked, hand in hand, down the narrow path toward the harbor, Alexander marveled at how natural it felt to move between his 2 worlds within the same day, from international business calls to mending nets under the stars. The island had become a bridge between his past and future, and Elena had become the anchor that kept him grounded in what truly mattered. Alexandros, Elena said as they reached the harbor where the village was gathering for their evening meal, do you ever miss the excitement of your old life? Alexander paused to watch Dimitri dramatically gesturing as he told his sea monster story to a group of delighted children. The old fisherman caught his eye and winked, and Alexander felt the deep contentment that had eluded him for so many years. How could I miss something that was never real? He replied, squeezing Elena's hand. This is excitement. This moment, this life, this love that exists in the space between memory and hope. As the sun set over Calathea Island, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Alexander Reeves, who was also Alexandros the fisherman, also the man who had learned that wealth meant nothing without love, sat down to share a simple meal with the people who had given him back his soul. And for the first time since that Greek translator had spoken in his boardroom, all his memories were exactly where they belonged.